Hi everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Orca Group Series. Today we're talking to Hanne Strager, a renowned author, marine biologist, and designer of museums all around the world. Do you want to say hello and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your...
I'm Hanne Strager, and I write, and I'm a marine biologist, and I have studied killer whales in Norway for many years, and I've also traveled in different places of the world to experience and learn about killer whales in those areas. And also I'm the curator of exhibitions at natural history museums, and currently I'm working on a wonderful project called The Whale, which is a new museum about whales, which is scheduled to open in northern Norway in 2026.
That's amazing. I'd love to actually visit that place at some stage, Hanne. But you know what? Has there any particular moment during your research or journey that profoundly altered your perspective of orca?
It's not easy to pick out one episode and say that did it. But I think perhaps the thing that blew me most away happened a long time ago, and it was actually my first encounter of them all. And maybe that's typical of many people, that the first encounter is the one that stays with them the longest. But the really fantastic thing about that particular encounter was that I never even saw the killer whales. I was working in northern Norway. I was a student, and I had volunteered to be a cook on a small rebuilt fishing vessel full of enthusiasts and conservationists and biologists. And one day, this tall guy came back because they'd forgotten something, and he said they had killer whales just outside the harbor if I wanted to come along. And I hurried to get into the Zodiac, and we went out. And when we got there, the whales were gone. We couldn't find them, and it was a kind of a gray and grisly day, not very charming weather. But it was relatively calm. We were in the lee side of a big mountain, and this guy said, well, this is where they were an hour ago, so they can't be far away. And then he rigged a hydrophone, and he gave me the headphones, and I mean, all that was completely new to me. I didn't even really know at that time that you could hear things underwater. So I put the headphones on, and the first thing I heard was this gurgling sound as the hydrophone went down through the water. And then I heard the calls of the killer whales. These sounds like whistling, very melodical. And I knew, without anyone having to explain to me, that was whales, and they were communicating. And it was very moving, and it was a very profound experience, because I think because I realized that they were talking to each other, that they were staying in contact underwater in that dark water somewhere. I couldn't even see them. I had no idea where they were, but they knew where each other were, and they were communicating. And that was a really strong experience, probably because when you realize that someone with another species, that they're communicating, you also realize that they're not so far away from us, that they're doing something that we completely understand what is. They are staying in contact, they are sending out warning signals, they are doing all the things that we also do when we are communicating. And that was a game changer for me. That I think that's when I decided that I wanted to study these animals.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be just amazing. We have such limited exposure to reality in our perception in our bodies in a biological way, you know. We only see certain wavelengths of color, and we can only speak to each other and communicate to each other through fractured languages. And you know, it's these animals can see through echolocation and have the whistles, calls, and clicks to communicate to each other and to other groups of killer whales. And they're fascinating creatures.
Yeah, and they can do it over really vast distances. These whales, they may have been 10 kilometers away at this point, and they may have been spaced out. They may have been kilometers apart them as well. Still, they could communicate across these great expanses of water, and very likely they were, when they dive down, there's not much light, so they couldn't see each other, but they still stayed in contact. And that is, yeah, it was a revelation for me. And I think it's something that you can read, that this is how it is, that they communicate and then and they can do it underwater. But when I heard it, I understood it. It was more than just reading about it. It was, wow, they're really doing this, and this is what it sounds like. And it's also quite beautiful, I think. So it has also an oral quality that was just breathtaking.
You make it sound like you've just stumbled across an alien civilization, like an advanced alien civilization that just absolutely blew your mind. And they kind of are, aren't they? They're these advanced creatures, but they just live in a different environment.
Yeah, I have no idea how advanced they are, but I certainly understood that that they communicate just like we do. I actually don't think that they are. I know there are people who think that they are somehow superior to us in many ways, and to me, it doesn't really make sense to compare like this, because the way they live is so different.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice to know that different species, even if they live very, very different lives, also have a lot of things in common with us.
I think the biggest difference between, like if you were to just put it on the terms of advancements, we're tool builders, where they make the most of what they got. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. They are certainly, they share a lot of the characteristics that we find in our own species, but also in other very social species, where there's a lot of caretaking of young, there's a strong cohesion in the group, there's a lot of communication, there's a social hierarchy. I mean, they probably most likely have very different roles in the social groups. And those are things that we also recognize from other species and from ourselves. And I think then it's easier to make a connection and to say, well, they're not aliens, they're not weird, they have developed a lot of the behaviors that we know, and they've developed them for the same reasons. When you're a social animal, it makes sense to take care of your youngs just like we do.
You know, Hannah, you wrote a book about Darwin, and it sounds like it's connected there, because we all became from a common ancestor. So it makes sense that we have those kind of similar those traits within each other.
Exactly. I remember when I wrote that book, I did a lot of talks about Darwin and evolution, and for some people it's quite provocative when you say that not only do we descend from apes, we are apes. I
We
mean,
are apes,
of
yeah.
course we apes.
Yeah.
And we share so much with other organisms, not just apes, but also with elephants, and I mean, even with trees and bananas. And I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many things in our cells and our genes, which you find in all other, most other organisms as well. And for some people, this is something they don't like. They like to see humans as somehow superior or different.
Yeah.
Whereas
Apart
for
from
me,
the animal kingdom.
yeah, apart from the animal world, but for me, there's a huge comfort in that thought. I like the idea that we share so much with other organisms. It
Me too.
makes me feel less alone on this planet. It makes me feel that I'm connected to everything else that's alive. And I think that's the most comforting thought there is.
Yeah,
But
I think
I
it comes
understood
down
when I was doing these talks that not everybody feels this way.
I do, especially in Ireland with the older generation. If you were to say we're animals, they'd lose their minds with you. They think that you're insulting them somehow,
Exactly. Yeah.
And no, it's because we have, huge challenges with communication and social conditioning, and obviously influences from religion and so on, that we have this disconnected sense from nature and the world around us in the moment. And I think that contributes to the problems that we have, but anyway, like, I know that you read or you wrote books about Darwin and our interesting discussion there so far. But what do you think causes people from diverse cultures to feel such emotional connections to Orca, Hanne?
Well, I think there are two things that makes us have this strong connection to orcas or to killer whales. And the one thing we already touched upon, that is that we think we realize that they are social and that they're doing things that we also do, and we recognize something in ourselves, in them, and that builds a connection. And I think that is a really important part. There was this story 4 or 5 years ago with actually maybe 6 years ago, with a killer whale in the Seattle, Vancouver area that gave birth. And the baby either died right after birth or was stillborn. And this killer whale mother carried the calf for 70 days. And this story went viral, and you could read about it all over the world. And the reason we could read about it all over the world is that it touches us. We get moved. We realize that this killer whale mother was feeling the same kind of love and loss as other mothers do if they lose a baby. And so we could connect. So I think that's very important part of our fascination with these animals, is that we connect. We recognize traits, behaviors that are familiar to us. The other thing I think is that they're absolutely beautiful. They're just, you can't really discuss that they're gorgeous. They're just beautiful, and they're also very impressive. They're predators. They're huge. They are powerful, and I think humans have always been fascinated with predators. And actually, in my book, I touch a little bit on this as well. Like, why are we so obsessed with wolves and sharks and crocodiles and bears and killer whales and Ed Wilson, who was this famous American biologist, he said we love our monsters, that he thinks this is
so
like a tribal thing, that it goes back in ancient history, and that we're totally fascinated about predators. We can't stop chatting about them. We are, but it's also a way of dealing with them. And if you're dealing with them, and then you're more prepared. So it's a way of being prepared to meet predators. It's a way of actually being safe. In order to be safe, you need to know them. So he thinks this obsession, fascination, goes hand in hand with that they're dangerous. I think that's true. I think that we are fascinated with predators because they are dangerous, and that makes us more prepared. And it goes way back.
It goes way back, cave paintings. But do you know what that orca you're talking about is Tahlequah J35.
Yeah.
And scientists were like, they observed, as far as I know now. So they observed when calves stop breeding, that they'll put them on their tops of their head, and they lift them as far out of the water as possible and drop them, like an orca's version of CPR, trying to get them to breathe again. And that's what they thought was happening there. But when she carried them for 2 weeks over 1,000 miles, it turned into something much different. It turned into like the process of grief, the process of loss. She went and traveled without being able to feed, without being able to sleep. And I think if we put ourselves into that kind of thing, as parents, or as like mothers especially, would feel that. And as a father, I felt that. I remember, my daughter was 5 weeks premature, and it was the start of COVID, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep with hearing her little squeaks and so on in the cot. And I maybe, sleeping like 3 hours a day, looking after her, making sure that she was okay and still breathing. And I'm getting a bit emotional actually just thinking about that. But she's fine. But
I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah. But I think we all seen that, and we all felt that, and that's what made that extremely special to people.
Yes, I agree. And really, if we think about it, I don't think it should be very strange that animals have emotions. I think of emotions from a biological point of view. Emotions is what tie us together in a family and tie us together in a social group. And in a social group, you need to know each other. You need to communicate. You need to be able to warn each other, which means you need to be able to feel fear, and you need to be able to appreciate what others do for you. And in a mother and a father in a small family, the emotions are there also to secure that the offspring survives. If we didn't love our offsprings, we wouldn't care. So I think emotions are there for a reason. It's not just something that we have and animals doesn't have. They have them for the exact same reasons. If a mother animal of any species love its kids or pups or whatever it is, then they are better at taking care of them. It's what makes us take care of those in our family so they survive, and those in our social group so that the social group works better. Yeah.
And I always thought, when you look at language, how we actually form it, we form it from emotion. So English or Danish or whatever you're speaking, it's always translated from our emotions. And I think that as a species, that's what connects us, So anyway, we'll move on. So Hanne, based on your research findings, why is the preservation of orcas and their habitats so vital?
But one thing that's really interesting about orcas or killer whales is that they're found all over the world. There's actually not really a place where you couldn't find them. You can find them in icy water in the polar regions. You can find them in coastal areas. You can find them far offshore in pelagic waters. You can find them in around tropical islands. I mean, they are more common in some areas than in others, but they're in many different places. In all these different places, they have evolved different strategies of coping with the environment, and that means that they have different diet preferences, and with all these diet preferences comes specialized behavior. So for instance, you will have animals that are specialized on killing seals or seal pups, and either catching them in the water or on the shore, beating themselves to catch them on shore. You have groups of killer whales that specialized on attacking large baleen whales and much bigger than themselves, killing them. And you have many different groups of killer whales in different parts of the world that have specialized on different species of fish or groups of fish. So you have salmon eaters specialized in salmon. Doesn't mean that they don't eat other things, but this is what they eat most. And for instance, in Norway, where I work, they are herring specialists, and it's a very, very specialized behavior to catch herring, because herring is actually too fast for the killer whales to just swim up and catch. So they have to herd them together in what we call a bait ball, and then they actually stun and kill them by a tail slap. And first then, when they are unconscious or dead in the sea, can the killer whales pick them up one by one. So I think that with killer whales or orcas, all these different behaviors and specialized diet preferences, and also specialized vocalizations that come with it, and many different behaviors that are special for different populations of killer whales, is what we call animal cultures. And this is a relatively new thing, that we talk about animals that have cultures, and cultures, in contrary to things that we are born with, that we have inherited in our genes. This is a behavior that we inherit through social learning. And we're not really used to thinking about animals as having cultures, but the last maybe 15, 20 years, it's been realized that actually there are many, probably more and more species of animals that have cultures, in the sense that they have behaviors that they transfer from generation to generation. This is how we do it in our population. Just like our cultures is also transferred from generation to generation via social learning, and not just because we're born like this. And I think that this adds to the complexity of conservation when you talk about killer whales or orcas, because it's not just enough to say that the species as such should be conserved and we need to we need to protect the species. When they have different cultures, we actually need to think about them as separate populations that should, each of them, be conserved, because if that population die out, maybe that specialized behavior that they have dies out with them too. And there are so many killer whales in the world, and there are so many of them that are not really studied, that we don't know what their different cultures are. There are some where we do, but everything has not been mapped yet. So in general, I think it's important to think of all the different populations of killer whales we see as something that could potentially be unique and need to be treated that way.
That's very, very true. And they are also an indicator of environmental pollutions and influences from humans. because they're so interlinked and long-lived like we are, they also have like identifiers like BPAs in their system that we've introduced into waters. It is BPAs, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not a chemist, but it's primarily what is called organic pollutants, PCBs and PCDs, DDTs, and this whole family of organochlorines, which are really toxic.
Yeah, the forever chemicals. Anyway, and I'd like to actually get a little bit on the topic of your work and your life and so on, Hanne, because you've like have a fascinating career so far. You've built and curated museums around the world and wrote books and was involved in the area of research in Norway with the Orcas. But so you've had remarkable career experiences so far, which has left the most, but what has left the most impact on shaping your role in making science accessible to the public?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think even when I was a biology student, I started by going out on ships, being a naturalist, a guide on board ships, talking to people about the ocean, whales, bird life. And I think I realized that I was quite good at it. But it also, it's a very rewarding thing to do, because you get in touch with so many people, and most people are actually really, really interested. And I just think that it's important to talk about conservation and animals and the sea and the ocean, and it's becoming ever more important. And I think I've been inspired by so many people that it would seem like almost arrogant to mention them, because they are, I mean, some of them are like giants in the field, like Jacques Cousteau or Jane Goodall, and of course David Attenborough. I mean, they are role models for everybody who's trying to communicate science and talk about wildlife and nature. But they have certainly inspired me and influenced me. So in a modest way, I think I've just been trying to replicate what some of these heroes of my youth, what they have been doing, and but more than anything, I think it's the people that I meet which makes it interesting to carry on and to do it. I always felt that being a biologist is the most interesting thing that you can possibly be on Earth, and to continue talking about discoveries and science and conservation is just inspiring for myself. So you can say that I'm doing it because I think it feels nice, but that's the true answer.
That's a great answer, actually. But through doing it for yourself, you've created such different, diverse platforms where people can learn, like books and museums, and you do these interviews, and you have social media, and you do the in-person things, being on boats and research papers, and you've spanned an awful lot of different platforms to inspire people. And when I first researched you and seen your books, I was inspired, and thanks very much for all the work that you've done.
Thank you. I think I'm not really an expert in anything, because I've been I've been doing too many different things to call myself an expert, but it's also it's a privilege to be able to do many different things, to both write and do some science and make museum work. But all of it, I think, is bound together by this desire to communicate science, to talk about what is really important in the world.
You know, you make a very good point there between specialists and generalists. And in my opinion, specialists have a hard time getting their message out there because they're so focused on their works that the platforms onto which they teach or they inspire other people are not as strong as generalists would be, because they span their work over many different platforms. And I suppose, to me anyway, generalists have a bigger impact on showcasing what we need to know in science in our environment. And while those specialists have a huge impact on what we know, it's also important on how we know it.
Yeah.
But I was, you mentioned museums there, and an awful lot of people don't understand the creation of a museum and the importance of designing a museum. Like, everyone walks into, I know this is going to be a vastly different analysis, or not analysis, but a kind of like an anyway, I'm just going to get into it. So everyone walks into a shopping center and they don't think about the layout of a shopping center. But in my area of expertise, which is business and marketing, we actually touched upon this in college. Like, the layout of a shopping center is immensely curated and designed so that it has the biggest impact on exposure to brands and stuff like that. So you have things put in place from impulse buy perspective and consumer behavior. Okay, so but the design of a museum would have to be somewhat similar. So my question to you, Hanne, is what piece exactly can you remember that you designed had the biggest impact on people's perspective of the science that you curated?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's designed yet, but of the things that the exhibitions I have curated and produced, I think in a very large scale gallery or exhibition we made in 2009 to celebrate Darwin's 200 years anniversary had a huge impact. I don't know if it was the way we did it or if it was the general hype around Darwin at the time. So it's hard to say. What I would like to say about museums, and especially natural history museums, is that I think that they are changing, or that they should change, because the whole idea of natural history museums are based in 15th, 16th century collection mania, and the idea of if we just get one of each, then we understand the whole world, and we understand it through specimens, which was totally right at the time. It's still not wrong, but the idea of letting people see these things came later. It came with the Enlightenment, and educating people and teaching them about anatomy and species and botany and all these kind of things was something that you could learn in a museum at a time where all these things were not taught in school. And so basically natural history museums are like palaces of knowledge that is accessible to people. But my point is that is changing now, because knowledge is accessible to everybody in a totally different way today than it was 100 years ago, or even 30 years ago. Internet and the way that we can all access knowledge right away via a cell phone is changing, I think, museums. I still think museums will be palaces of knowledge, but I don't think people will necessarily visit them to learn as much as they want to experience and to have a feeling, an emotional experience. And I think that transition should transform exhibitions. I think when it comes to designing an exhibition, I'm more concerned about how can I inspire people than what can I teach people. If a museum, an exhibition, a place can inspire people so they walk out of the place saying, I want to learn about this, or I want to change this, then I think they've come much further than if they walk out saying, oh, now I know this or that. So I think the goal for me when I am thinking about exhibitions, and for instance, this new place called The Whale, the new museum that's not open yet, it is to touch people, to move them, to make them react. And I think in order to do that, you have to combine science and art, because art is much better at moving people than science is.
It's a great question, or a great answer, I mean. Yeah, I totally agree. Like, it's one thing knowing that the works of Michelangelo da Vinci exist, but it's quite another to be in the same room as something he had once laid his hands upon.
Yeah.
And that's the experience. Like, so if you were when you're designing the Whale Museum in Norway, it's one thing to understand the structure of an orca or a whale. It's quite another to be able to see it in size, be able to compare yourself to that, and or whatever other pieces that you have planned for that museum, which sounds absolutely amazing. And talk about that though, Hanne. There has been a bit of controversy with like museums around the world, like Smithsonian and so on, that they acquire these pieces from around the world, from different cultures, and sometimes without consent. So how, like, when you think about the works of museums and the influences of the different nomadic or small communities of people, how do you design something that kind of like curates to and respects where these things come from, to the indigenous people that probably where the piece originates from? Or can you?
Well, I think when for the kind of exhibitions that I have made with natural history, there's usually not as big a controversy when it comes to the specimens, because they in many cases they don't have a strong cultural significance. There are exceptions to this. One of them, for instance, is the meteors that are at the American Museum of Natural History, which were picked up by Peary in Greenland and now resides in New York. And so there are examples of natural history specimens that have a significance from the place. But if I look forward to the museum that we are working on now in Norway on whales, the way we want to address it is to let different people, whether they are indigenous or not, but also indigenous people, have a voice, either through footage or video or music related to whales or stories and cultures about whales, but it could also be art pieces that they contribute. For instance, in northern Norway, there are Sami people, and we know that they have a connection to whales, some whale species. It could be that we ask a Sami artist to contribute a piece to the museum, or we ask an artist from Vancouver Island, a First Nation artist, to make something that shares with the world how they see orcas or killer whales in his community. So I think the way we'll handle it is by inviting different artists and people and cultures to actually participate in creating things for the museum.
Yeah, that's amazing, because you're giving them a voice, and it's also going to enrich your museum so much than having just one perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole concept of the museum is that it's not just about local history. Local history will be present there because it's actually built on a site where once people lived, and there are heaps of fish bones and a few whale bones, which are telling us that people have lived here probably for thousands of years, and they've eaten from the sea. So there will be something about the local history, but whales do not really know any borders. So for us, it doesn't make sense to talk about just local whales. They travel from far away, and they are it's a global thing, and we live in a global world. So the museum is also about whales in New Zealand and Argentina and Ireland. So yeah, there'll be stories from all over the world.
So will you have any technology to allow remote viewing of this museum, or do you have to go there in person?
We don't know yet, because the first brick has not been placed. So we are still in the planning phase of what will the content be. So what I'm telling you now are general concepts, not the specifics we don't know yet.
It's a very exciting program, isn't it? It's a very exciting project.
Yeah, it's a wonderful project.
That's pretty much it now, Hanne. We talked about an awful lot of things, and do you want to just talk a bit about your new book that you released and where people can find it, or what's your website? And
yeah, this whole talk we've had is about orcas or killer whales, and my fascination, or you can even call it obsession with them. And I wrote a book about it, which is called The Killer Whale Journals. And it's kind of a different book than a lot of other books about killer whales or orcas, because it's about our relationship with them in the wild. And you may think that everybody loves killer whales, and luckily lots of people do, but they have also been persecuted and even hunted in places. And I have traveled to many different places to piece together this book about our attitude to killer whales and what it is that defines whether we end up hating them or loving them.
And from when I was reading it, it has a lot of stories about you and your life and growing up and falling in love, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful book.
It has a lot of stories from different places, and it has something about my life. And you can buy the book, I think, in most places where you would normally buy a book. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Barnes and Noble. You can maybe even buy it in your own local books shop. I don't know. If you buy it and read it, I'll be really, really happy if you will review it on the platform where you bought it. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, especially Amazon. Please review the book on Amazon. That actually would help Hanne an awful lot. And please subscribe to this channel. I'll put in my own plug in there. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. That'll help the channel grow and the Orca Group grow. And yeah, I have big plans, but all big plans cost money, unfortunately. Hanne, it's been wonderful. It's
Thank
been
you for
wonderful.
having me.
Yeah,
And keep up the good work.
thanks very much, and same to you. I can't wait to visit your whale museum in Norway. I'm definitely going to go. Yeah,
Good idea.
so that first brick, I can't wait for it to be laid. So thanks very much, Hanne.
Okay, bye.